Hi, and welcome back to our study group discussing Peter Adamson's History of Philosophy without any gaps. Today, discussing episode 31 of the series on the history of classical Indian philosophy. I'm Nerdalliun Plebz, and today with me, Rogério Marques and Grandpa. Welcome back, guys.
Always great to be here.
Always great to be on such a series. So onward to showing the visual aids, the slides on this school of philosophy. We're almost finished with all the 6 darshanas. Only remaining are Nyaya and Vaisheshika, if I'm counting right. So Nyaya is much more, it's very oriented towards logic and epistemology, while when we get to the Vaisheshika, we will see they are also very uh, um, kind of oriented to seemingly scientific terms like atomism. So, but for now, Nyaya. So, uh, just in passing, my kid was around and he wanted to make a slide. So he added a person in lotus position with the chakra. So yeah, well, uh, shout out to my kid who made a slide. He wanted to be a part of this. Then, so for the founder, as always, as usual, with these guys. He is believed to have lived somewhere between BCE and Common Era. So, damn it, they preserved their texts quite well. They were really good at preserving their ancient texts, but the more historical data, well, it didn't come so well. Maybe some texts were lost, and those were the more historical texts. So maybe history of philosophy is a very important thing, but they didn't think about that at the time. So Gautama, also known as Aksapada, um, so scholars think that he was more likely living in the 1st and 2nd centuries Common Era, because there was a lot of it was a period of intense logical activity of Indian thought, and so well that's the more likely time where he might have lived. Also, well, his two names, Gautama Aksapada. Gautama is really important for people to keep in mind, to not confuse him with Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of the Buddhist school, one of the heterodox schools. Um, well, see his name, his Aksapada literally means eyes in his feet. It might have to do with his dedication to empiricism, and having his feet on the ground and feeling the material world of this earthly world. And supposedly he comes from Mithila, which is to the northeast of India. I also threw in a marker for Bengal as well. Not that he was ever at Bengal, but because the more modern school moved there, so that when I mention it in a few slides, we all have more or less an idea, because Indian geography isn't a thing that every person in the world uh, has at heart, I guess. Then, as for his legacy, it's the Nyaya Sutra, the foundational text that is attributed to him. Again, taking this with a grain of salt. What is attributed to him might be, for sure, some sutras composed by him, but then other sutras or modifications might have been done since his life, and still they have ended up being attributed to him, to Gautama Aksapada. Anyway, what we have is a text with more or less 500 mnemonic aphorisms. It is divided into 5 adhyayas, or lessons, also known as books. Each of these adhyayas is further subdivided, each one of them, into 2 anikas, or sections. So in total 10 sections. It provides analysis of argument structure and the sources of knowledge. So literally logic and epistemology, a treatise on logic and epistemology. It also gives an advice on the proper way to conduct debates. So a few sprinklings of rhetoric perhaps as well. But as we shall see, it's kind of more or less honest rhetoric, it seems. Then regarding the known unknowns, Karl H. Potter, one of the scholars on Indian philosophies, one may sum up the situation pretty safely by saying that we have not the vaguest idea who wrote the Nyaya Sutras or when he lived. So, kind of shedding some a sobering commentary on the certainty of what we have here. But anyway, we have the text, either whoever it was that wrote it. Then it's also worthwhile to mention that there are two major schools of Nyaya. So there's the ancient Nyaya, Prachina Nyaya, and the modern Nyaya, Navya Nyaya. So the first one is basically a development of the foundational text of Gautama, and also evolved in the process of attack, counter-attack from hard critics. Some of those are from Buddhism, for instance, these skeptics, while the Navya Nyaya, it began with a work, an important work. It started in Mithila, which was the place attributed to where Gautama lived, perhaps born. And then they moved to Bengal, more to the south, but still pretty much to the east of India. And they conserve their focus on logic and epistemology. It's not clear whether the modern school of Nyaya still conserves the concern with matters of liberation. That's a question that I couldn't answer. Also, this modern Nyaya flourished in Mithila, but then they moved to Bengal. The modern school lays almost exclusive emphasis on logical aspects. So this note that I have probably means that maybe they aren't so religious now, at least in their this modern school. Also, the advent of the modern school made the ancient school lose some of its popularity. Moreover, the modern school is also highly syncretist. They probably incorporated lessons they learned from centuries of criticism and skepticism, and also from other schools. Basically, a synthesis or an amalgamation between Nyaya and the Vaisheshika systems. So the Vaisheshika, as I mentioned, is a kind of a buddy or companion school to the Nyaya, since some of their interests were aligned. At least they were both quite empirically oriented. And maybe we will, when we get there, we will get there. But maybe the Vaisheshika also were interested in formal logic in some sense because of their seemingly scientific interests. Then, so to give you guys a kind of a chronology of the texts, and for us to have a perspective of the centuries passing and different texts commenting the previous popping up. So there's these names, big names, Gautama Aksapada, as we've seen. Then Vatsyayana, the earliest known commentary of the Nyaya Sutra. Then Adyotakara, and so on, up to the turn of the second millennium. Then, there's also the scholars also give us some ideas that the Nyaya Sutra reached its final form later than the 2nd century, only in the 4th century. So maybe it was kind of like a Google Doc where it got edits by multiple people. This can happen. In the Advaita Vedanta film that I've seen, Adi Shankara clearly gives his sutra to another guy for the guy to comment on his sutra, and probably this was a common practice in those times. So also it's worthwhile to mention that all these subsequent volumes, they explain and develop the ideas contained in the Nyaya Sutra, and also defend them against attacks of hostile critics. Then here we have the second big name, Vatsyayana. He says, to describe Nyaya, Nyaya is the examination of things with the help of evidence, pramana, an argument based on observation and received belief is called an anviksa, or reconsideration, and the discipline known as anviksiki nyaya is that which pertains to such arguments. Literally, here he is appropriating anviksi, which is a term, one of the terms found in Chanakya's Arthashastra, of the 4 branches of learning, and this anviksi word is akin to rational investigation. Also, Vatsyayana tries to use this term, applying it specifically to the study of arguments based on evidence. So, kind of, in a word, accepting this term. Using it, it started more broadly, and he's using it in a more focused kind of way. Also, what does the word nyaya mean? So, method or general rule or logical explanation, or a principle through which various concepts are understood or explained. And then we can also mention the term nyayas. So they are formulaic ways to make judgment calls and unambiguously interpret encrypted verses of text, texts such as the Upanishads, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Purana, Darshana, etc. And then to encapsulate Nyaya in a nutshell, so as mentioned, we know who it was supposedly founded. They accepted the external world as reality, so they weren't ones for idealism. They were really concerned with realism, concerned with systematic and correct propositions and means to obtain knowledge. So hence their specialization. They ascribe to the messenger theory of truth, which is basically a statement or thought is true in so much as that it conforms to the reality which it describes. So this is, to me, an interesting distinction. Also, they take language as words having a nominalist nature, which is they reject the idea that of the realist conception of knowledge, that of language, that the meanings of terms are kind of like universally terms. Rather, they hold a position that language is practically all assigned through convention. The meanings of the words are assigned through convention. Also, they borrowed heavily from the Vaisheshika metaphysics, which, remind you, they were the atomists of ancient India. And well, this surprised me, although they have such a seemingly scientific, quasi-Aristotelian kind of seemingly almost organon kind of thing going on here with the logic. Their ultimate end is liberation. So they're selling the same product as all the other schools, both orthodox and heterodox schools, it turns out, mostly. So basically, they use these refinements of logic and epistemology to serve their basically an end product, so to speak. As for their doctrine here is their own word for doctrine, Siddhanta. So they don't believe that all knowledge is not intrinsically valid. So it must again be in agreement with how things really are, with truth. So we can say that they have a system of logic realism. To remind everyone, realism is a philosophical position that holds that the existence of things or objects in the world is independent to knowledge and mind, whatever the mind does, while still qualia or experience that people have needs a mind to exist, of course. But material stuff does not depend on our minds. It does not need minds to exist. While the idealists, to contrast with this, the idealists posit that material objects cannot exist if there are no minds. So material objects, according to the idealists, can only exist if they are related to some mind. Just like feelings and cognitions exist only as they are in some mind, so objects in the world exist only as they are actually experienced, or at least thought of by us or by God. So this is to contrast between realism and idealism. Of course, the Nyayas are hardcore realists, basically. Then, as for before going forward with the system of the school and its subjects of study, so I'll silence myself now, and feel free, guys, to add to this or discuss.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just a playful thought came to mind when you talked again about the difficulties of dating the people, of knowing when they lived, and I thought, well, it seemed like a common preoccupation of a lot of these teachers was to avoid being reborn. So I imagine they may have had an aversion to have biographical details of them recorded in a way, just in case that may lead to karma in the future and them being reborn or whatever. And there may be one fun way to think of their birth, as you could say. His first incarnation was about 600 BCE, and his last incarnation was around the second century CE. So
Yeah, well, their doctrines are biting them back.
And then I think it's Anvikshiki. You translate it as rational inquiry, and I think it's a decent translation. But I also remember, I don't know if it's in this specific episode or if it's one of the later episodes, but Peter Adamson saying how Western epistemologists, especially modern epistemologists, may find the lack of a distinction between rationalism and empiricism maybe a bit foreign to them, because that's quite a common distinction to make. So yeah, as long as with rational inquiry we don't mistake that to mean like a wedded to rationalism as opposed to empiricism. They kind of wed empiricism and rationalism, or weave it together in a way that doesn't make distinction between those. But so yeah, argument and evidence going together with that in Bhikshiki. Yeah, and I think the something I quite liked about the Nyaya system that Peter Adamson said was that one of the arguments was that to achieve goals, one needs knowledge of how to achieve those goals. So knowledge is required in meeting practical ends, and those practical ends could be quite mundane things like just wealth or health. It seems they did draw some on the medical literatures of the day. But it could also be more elevated spiritual goals like liberation, and in both cases you need correct knowledge of how to achieve that. And yeah, but if the Nyaya Sutra was written about the 2nd century CE, there would have been a plethora of schools having contradictory things to say about how to achieve liberation. So I think for anyone who's bothered by contradiction and self-coherence or whatever, it may have seemed necessary. Like if you would want spiritual liberation, to first get clear on how to determine which of the claims about spiritual liberation are true, or how you could possibly obtain true knowledge about that. So they may have been very sincere in that sort of spiritual quest, and just as a practical matter, felt a pressing need to determine how they could know the correct way, or like an effective way to achieve that, and hence spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about and discussing that. And I quite like that. It seems like it's the kind of philosophy that I really appreciate. And then I just have a little question about the term vidya, and actually terms, and avidya. I think avidya means something like the lack of vidya, but I don't know what the meaning of vidya, or like brief. Are you gonna define that a bit later, or translate that a bit later?
Well, vidya and avidya are words very much related to knowledge or cognition. So it depends on who is translating. I think vidya is true knowledge or proper cognition or true cognition, while avidya is false knowledge or false cognition. And it's also really important to emphasize the active kind of way in which these Indian philosophers thought about knowledge as an active process coming from Panini's tradition.
Yeah, so maybe something closer to knowing and incorrect knowing than knowledge as an abstract object. It's like a activity, active thing.
Yeah.
So like the act of knowing, knowledge acquisition. All right. Yes, you could. Yeah, the sentence structure seems a bit funny there. You say knowledge acquisition is a systematic process that empowers us to acquire knowledge.
Oh yeah. Well, basically the use of pramanas, which could replace knowledge acquisition. So the use of sources of proper knowledge that they identify are a systematic process that tends to give true knowledge and tends to reject false knowledge. That's the idea that I wanted to imprint here. Yeah, but fair point.
Yeah, I'm just sorry. I'm just trying to get clarity for myself here. And was in one of the slides you had the difference between pramana and pramanas. Was with the S? It's the systematic process.
Maybe this year.
Nyaya and nyayas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I may be confused with the terminology here. Formulaic ways. So is pramanas not a thing then? Am I just confused?
Yeah. we will get to those. We will get to those. Yeah. I believe that Nyayas involve, and we will see when we will tackle the 16 topics. And I think these 16 topics are like the Nyayas. And one of those is the Pramanas. And if these 16 are working well, and the Nyaya adept knows them well and puts them in place well, recognizes the ones that are productive, and also identifies when one of the unproductive ones are present, he can kind of navigate through truth acquisition and also debates as well.
All right, thanks. That's me. I'll tag out and give Graham a chance to chime in.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say, it's I'm not trying to keep it entirely straight. Some of it's just going for the feel, because I know I'm not going to keep all the vocabulary straight. It's just just trying to learn as much as I can during the pass through. One of the aspects of it that seemed interesting is it seems that they're saying that matter is embedded within mind, and it seems like interlaced layers of matter, mind, and they very much seem almost akin to sophists in a lot of ways, where they're into the arguing over the points, but they're also into the truth as well. So it's sort of a kind of not a combination the Greeks stumbled onto. But it seems that liberation is something that seems almost appended onto it, that they needed to have just to compete in the marketplace. And the
Yeah,
real
exactly.
interest is in the logic and the epistemology. Going to tag on that.
I think these guys would give nice advisors to people in positions of power, completely without any relation to the liberation thing. But they might have kept the liberation thing because they needed to to fit in, basically. I also found that the fact that they still have the liberation thing going on quite amusing. That they have this system that can distinguish between quacks and people that have merit and they know what they're doing technically, or between fraudsters and con artists and people who are de facto inventors that invented something that can help society. I kind of imagine guys like these advising the king, "Oh, don't pay attention to this guy. He just said these kind of fallacies that are clearly blatantly showing that he doesn't know what he's talking about," while the inventor of merit would be properly identified, and the king would kind of be advised to fund his further studies, or to incorporate some of his technical solutions in how public administration is done or something like that. So I kind of see like these guys are sitting like a really important and useful tool for civilization, but in the end they say, well, we're just doing all this for liberation. So it's kind of amusing. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I sort of vaguely recall. I think we're going to move on to the 16 topics
yeah,
now, or
yeah,
is that a bit
yeah,
later?
yeah. It's right now. Yeah,
Yeah, so I think now is a good time to make the point. I think I recall Adamson quoting something to the effect that if it weren't for these 15 topics, the Nyaya would just be another spiritual school for liberation. But given these 16 topics, we have for the Nyaya Sutras, I guess a unique identity and a unique talking point, something like that. That was a very rough paraphrase of what he said. But yeah, like I think these topics that come up were considered quite important and sort of a defining feature of the what distinguishes the school from other approaches.
yeah. Well, they really seem to have a very powerful tool here for sifting through lies and deception, and identifying things that are actually matching how reality is. And their worldview is very interesting, which is truth is a thing that exists there. Uh, and whatever you do with your mind, it won't influence the truth. But you can employ measures to approximate your ideas of the world to that truth. It will be it will take work. It will be something that you have to dedicate yourself to, but it's possible. It's doable, and you kind of need to um, uh, employ a lot of effort. I quite identify with this philosophical position. I think I truly believe that truth is out there in the real world, like the fundamentals of the cosmos or whatever it is that underlies or underpins the cosmos. Whatever it is, we don't know. We have a lot of guesswork. Um, but it's there, and whatever our minds do, I don't think it will ever influence this underpinning or a code of the cosmos or whatever. What we can do is we trying as best as we can to investigate. It involves work to approximate whatever it is that is the truth, or at least to try to relate to the truth. So I admire these guys. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree that the truth is out there. The big challenge, though, is getting the truth in here. Tag.
Yeah, exactly. The big truth is to change the form of our thoughts so that it conforms to the truth in some way, so that it matches. Okay, so let's look at their topics and their vocabulary. So their philosophy subdivides in 4 parts. They are concerned with epistemology, as we've mentioned, also the basically cosmology as well, the individual self, and also some theology. Though we will only get into these in a later session. Then their philosophy subdivides into 16 padartha, which means 16 topics or objects of rational investigation. So topics of anvixiki, basically. This concept of anvixiki borrows from Chanakya or Kautilya, is basically what is at work here throughout these 16. So the first one is pramana. So basically means to the truth, means of getting at truth or acquiring knowledge, a way of knowing anything truly. Pramanas give us true knowledge and nothing but true knowledge, the most important topic of Nyaya. So then there is prameya, which are the objects of which we can acquire truth on. So, for instance, reality. But there are more. There is self, atma, body, sarira, 5 senses, indriya, the touch, smell, taste, sights, etc. The objects of the senses, also known as sensible qualities, called artha. Here I even detected a mistake. I believe Peter Adamson made. He confused artha, the word artha, with prayojana, which we will see later. Prayojana means goal, while artha is actually these sensible qualities, a bit matching with what we've seen with Samkhya, who distinguished the senses and then the sensible qualities. Then there's also, as objects of prameya, of this investigation, mind, which is manas. So this internal sense organ concerned with internal perceptions of pleasure, pain, etc. It also limits our cognition to one at a time, kind of like this workspace kind of thing that modern cognitive science, some of them talk about. The mind kind of being like an atom and one in each body. There's also activity, pravrti, which may be good or bad, and is of 3 kinds, namely vocal, mental, or bodily. This is where ethics comes in. So if they classify it as good or bad, then there's some ethics involved. Also mental defects called dosha, such as attachment, raga, hatred, dvesa, and infatuation, moha. If you guys want, feel free to ask any of these words. I'll share with you in the comments. These words are basically the root of our activities, both good or bad. Then there's also the prameya of rebirth after death, which is called pratyabhava, which is brought about by our good or bad actions. So, of course, they adopted this kind of doctrine that was prevalent in the northeastern India. There's also the prameyas of the experiences of pleasure and pain, phala, which, as you might remember, when we mentioned karma, there was also karma phala. So basically, the outcomes. There's also suffering, dukkha, which is an extremely common word from the Buddhist tradition. So basically, it's translated here as a bitter and painful experience that is commonly known. That's known universally to everybody. And finally, liberation or freedom from suffering. Basically, they call it this suffering apavarga, which means the absolute cessation of all suffering without any possibility of its recurrence. So it's strange that they used a term that's different from moksha here, apavarga. But anyway, so also this list is not exhaustive. This list of 12 that I just mentioned of prameyas, it's not exhaustive. It only focuses on the objects whose knowledge is important for liberation. So basically, they might have kind of dabbled into other things as side jobs or something like that, or maybe as commission jobs or something like that. But their main core business basically is focused to the product of liberation. Also, knowledge in Nyaya is regarded as a form of activity, as I emphasized earlier. Of course, the influence of the grammatical reflections found in Panini. Okay, so Panini, who made action central to the analysis of sentences and explained other grammatical elements as contributing factors like the instrument or purpose of the action. Okay, moving on. Samshaya, which means uncertainty. This term kind of struck me as the aporia of ancient Greece. So basically, it's doubt, a state of uncertainty, when the mind is wavering between different conflicting views about the same object, a bit like a certain donkey parable from the medieval age, who sits between two haystacks and he doesn't budge because both are equally close and he wants both and he can't decide between both. So also when a definite cognition of any differentia to decide between them is absent, basically, a bit like when in the case of the donkey. So one of the examples given is a distant figure a plant or a man? And so we don't have enough data, basically. We don't have enough experiential input to make a call on that. So it's just a figure that is indistinct. Also, doubt is not certain knowledge. It's not the mere absence of knowledge. It's not an error. Sometimes doubt is justified. Sometimes when we don't have enough or proper sensory input or proper pramanas working, it is actually the philosophically the best move to admit doubt, basically. Also, doubt is a positive state of cognition of mutually exclusive characters in the same thing at the same time. Then there is prayojana, which is the goal or end in view, object for which or to avoid which one acts. We act either to obtain desirable objects or to get rid of undesirable ones, like groceries versus trash. While prayojana loosely means goal, objective, Arthur literally means object of senses or sensible qualities. So this was my investigation to figure out maybe there was a mistake there in the Adamson's writings. Then this reminds us of how they in the Mimamsa, the sacrificer's desire is what makes a ritual incumbent upon the sacrificer. So no desire, no action. Then one of the Nyayakas, Vatsayana, he adds to that no knowledge, no result also. So how can you get to what you want when you literally don't know what you're doing? So this is important to serve the goal. Then there's the Stanta example. So an undisputed fact which illustrates a general rule, which is really very important to their theory of debates and is an essential part of any discussion or even reasoning. When people are reasoning, they are in a sense debating with themselves. So for a fact or an example to be considered a destanta, both sides of the debate must accept its effect for it to be considered a destanta. The example of Peter Adamson was a kitchen fire as a destanta for smoke implies fire. So, another example is often we see political disputes being fruitless. The only thing that they yield is a bunch of criticisms at best or insults, even very commonly, and no one gets closer to the matters of fact. Even the audience doesn't get more knowledgeable by assisting many of these debates, unfortunately. Moving on, then there is Siddhanta, which means doctrine. So it is what is taught and accepted as true in a system or school. This can come in handy because in debate, if someone says something that doesn't is incoherent with the Siddhanta of their own school, the witty opponent might pick up on that and show them that what they just have said is in contradiction to the fundamentals of their school, and this is one of the ways to invite the opponent to admit defeat in a debate. Siddhanta is a view that a certain thing is or is such and such. If it is accepted as true in a system, it is considered Siddhanta, a doctrine of that system. An example is in the Nyaya doctrine, they hold that the soul is a substance of which consciousness is a separable attribute. Then there is Avayava, which is a proposition, and this exclusively refers to propositions that are included or components of the syllogisms by the as described by the Nyaya school. So it's exclusively reserved to propositions that compose a syllogism. So any of the 5 propositions in which syllogistic inference requires to be stated if it is to prove or demonstrate a doctrine. Then there is Tarka, which is a hypothetical argument. So for instance, by exposing an absurdity of its contradictory, it justifies a certain conclusion. So suppose that we say, well, there are no crows that are not black. But then someone can easily point out, no, that's absurd. We've just seen crows that are dark gray or brown or something like that. And so, well, it's a bit similar to a hypothesis in the scientific tradition, in a sense. Then there is Nirnaya, which is what is considered legitimate knowledge. So legitimate knowledge is knowledge that has come from one of the pramanas, either from the senses and nothing contradicting it, or from the syllogistic comparison, or from very, very good testimony, or from inference, basically. Well, there's comparison and inference in these pramanas, as we'll see. So it's certain knowledge, Nirnaya is certain knowledge about anything attained by legitimate pramanas. It's usually preceded by doubt, by some saya, but not always. It also requires consideration of all pro and con arguments about a certain view or doctrine. So it often requires debate, basically. Then we enter in the forms of the types of debate: Vada, Jalpa, and Vitanda. The first one is considered honest debate, while the other two, Jalpa and Vitanda, are dishonest forms of debate, and I'll explain. So in Vada, the debate is based on pramanas and hypothetical arguments, tarka. Arguments are fully stated in the 5 foremost steps of inference. So if everyone plays nicely by the rules, parties are the exponents and the which is called vadi. The exponents, the first party is the exponent, and the second party, the opponent, are the prativadi, the opponents. So more terms, but this is just to say exponent and opponent, the two parties of the debate. So two-sided debates. Who tries to establish his own position and refute that of the other, but both try to arrive at the truth. So no one here is self-centered in the debate. They might have started from different positions, but they are equally open to abandoning their initial position if someone involved will show that they are wrong. Thus, since they are not trying to prove themselves right over the other, we can consider it an honest debate, and this is a debate that can be fruitful. For instance, there is the proper teacher versus student relationship, provided both are honest truth seekers. Often, most of the times, of course, due to his or her higher knowledge or more knowledge, the teacher will often correct the student, and the student, if the student is humble, he will accept the corrections and improve, and vice versa as well. Sometimes the teacher makes a mistake and the student corrects the teacher, and if the teacher is in an honest kind of debate, he will acknowledge and accept the correction and thank the correction as well. Now onto the dishonest forms of debate. So there's Jalpa. So this is a dishonest debate with position assertion. So both of the Vadi and Prativadi have stated their positions. So we're still not in skeptic land. We have two opposite parties who posit their positions, but their aim is only at victory over each other, not to make an honest attempt at coming to truth. So Gautama considers this mere wrangling, not a discussion aiming at truth. An example of this is lawyers in court, as they, although they, of course, the position is obvious there, it's even formalized, but they will try to use underhanded fallacies, underhanded techniques, etc., to prove the other wrong through rhetoric or other means. Then there's Vitanda, dishonest debate without position assertion, which is typical of skeptics, like that skeptic that we don't remember his name from a few sessions back, that he didn't say what, doesn't say what he defends, doesn't say what he's not, etc. And he's a very slithery guy, talking very, very carefully to make it seem like he doesn't have any position. Also, an example here is Nagarjuna, who lived in the 2nd, 3rd century. So very, very close to where this tradition was founded of Nyaya. In this Vitanda, the opponent only tries to refute that of the exponent, the position of the exponent. So it's destructive criticism. An example here could be in court, one of the lawyers abusing the plaintiff's pleader when one has no case, when they have no case. Then there are three types of lousy arguments. Hetvabasa, it comes from hetu, reason. So it's an argument that appears that it is valid, but it is not. So, for instance, fallacies of inference. So an inference where, for instance, the universal rule is a relationship that doesn't work at all, but it's presented in a nice syllogistic format for everyone to kind of look at. Oh, he or she is obeying the rules, but then they might miss that the terms in the comparison are not working. Then there's Chala, unfair reply by modifying the exponent's assertion. So this is, I think, straw manning. So attempting to contradict a statement by taking it in a sense other than the intended one. So basically, we change underhandedly or subtly the position of the opponent. This sounds really like straw manning to me. Then Jati is an unfair reply based on false analogy. So like saying, sound is non-eternal because it is an effect like the pot, said by the exponent. And the opponent will say, sound must be eternal because it is incorporeal like the sky. So there is no necessary explanation of the universal relationship between incorporeal and eternal. And some people might not notice that there's a kind of a forced comparison made here, but yeah. Then there is the last one, nigra hastana. So this is the ground of defeat in debate. It's kind of like the victory conditions. So there are two types: misunderstanding or wrong understanding, and the second one is want of understanding. So the first one is the person is mistaken, and the second one is the person is ignorant. At least my interpretation is. The party must admit defeat if they are exposed for misunderstanding or lacking understanding of their own or other statement and its implication. Also, if they are shown or exposed for shifting their original proposition or one's ground in the argument of or uses, or if they are exposed for using fallacious or otherwise poor arguments. For instance, sometimes philosophers offer proofs that only work according to the premises of their own school, which might be useful among allies, but it will not work in a debate with rival schools. Then, so there's this quote here by Vatsyayana, the commentator of Gautama. So without the specific mention of these items for study, and Kviksi would have been a mere study of the self or spiritual discipline, rendering Nyaya just like one of the others. Discipline like the Upanishads. By its discussion of the topics listed, it is shown to have its unique subject matter. So he's clearly differentiating Nyaya from the other darshanas. So there's also here a note of mine. So in other words, this list encapsulates what distinguishes the investigative critical discipline of Nyaya from the philosophies of path and purpose we examined. And Adamson said we examined in detail early in the series. So, he might be exaggerating. We didn't examine it. He didn't examine anything in detail. He, in my mind, he just gave us a really brief overview, including some of the major features of these schools, but leaving many aspects. So he's not introducing us to the schools like a real intro, but he's giving us a rundown, a really short summary. So I wouldn't say in detail. So this is just my little critique or commentary on Peter Adamson. He used a strong word here, in detail, on the previous episode. Okay, so here's a bit of dialectics from a skeptic. So a skeptic could come right up to a Nyayaka and say, we cannot trust a pramana like perception unless some further pramana tells us that it is trustworthy. Of course, this taking this skeptic's word for it would lead us into the trap of infinite regress. We would just end up kind of tasting the rice and not believing our own sense of taste, and then asking for another person to taste the rice as well, and saying if they say it, we also doubt them, and then call in a third person, and etc. Without end. It doesn't fly in the face of how things work in the real world, in the world of common sense and common practices. So Vatsyayana would say something like, no, if this were true, then the activities of practical life would be impossible, since the only way we ever achieve anything that we want is by knowing how to get it. This applies to mundane goals like wealth and pleasure, and to more exalted goals too. Of course, things are not like the skeptic posits. We are not living in a world where we don't apply heuristics, where there is only complete agreement between our minds and reality, or a lack of agreement between our minds and reality. We, of course, are always course correcting, like when one goes to their job in time every single morning and avoids crashing into someone or some vehicle. So we're constantly updating, we're constantly correcting, and so and we're also not aiming at omniscience. We're not aiming at knowing everything there is. We are only we're rejecting most of the stuff that's going on, and we are focusing on what is relevant to the task at hand, basically. Something miraculous that our minds can do. Also, Nyaya competes also with the Buddhists, not only on the epistemological front, by refuting their skeptical arguments, like this one, but also on the liberation front, because they say that the Nyaya school says that the elimination of suffering is one more objective, and the Nyayakas hold that it cannot be achieved only through knowledge, and through knowledge alone. And then Vatsyayana would say, those who hold no position. This is an attack against the skeptics that hold or try to hold no position. Those who hold no position and only try to dismantle the position of others are incoherent. Merely by rejecting the positive theories of others, they are forced to make positive claims of their own, even if by omission, because to deny a proposition is to assert its opposite. If the Buddhists deny that there is an enduring self, this means that they assert that there is no enduring self, which is itself a philosophical claim that then can be investigated and debated and whatnot. And this is pretty much the quite dense presentation of their system, and also at the same time of their vocabulary. So tagging out, feel free guys to comment and add to it.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was really interesting. I wanted to add about samsaya, or doubt and uncertainty. I think Peter Adamson listed 5 types, and he also placed it in as one of the ingredients in the process of coming to knowledge. And I think that little list of ingredients is quite nice too. So I think the procedure involves 7 essential ingredients. It's doubt, purpose, observational data, background principles, 5-limbed argument, hypothetical argument, and final decision. So yeah, doubt's the starting point of investigation. And then there are 5 types. One is an ordinary sort of doubt, when an object is perceived in outline but its specific character is unclear. Then there's a sort of doubt where the nature of an object is known but its properties are unknown. There's also a sort of uncertainty that occurs when 2 contradictory statements are made concerning the same object, and we are unsure which is true. And there are doubts about whether a thing is real at all, or whether it's an illusion, or like the appearance of a water in a desert mirage. And then there's a kind of doubt about whether an object that we cannot see is really there, such as a giraffe that may or may not be in the kitchen. Adamson with his giraffe jokes.
He always manages to slip when he has a chance.
He works very hard to make sure that the giraffes get a good show of it. Yeah, and then I wanted to. Oh, so I had a quick little control F for the skeptic that didn't take any position, and he was actually a target of criticism by Buddhist thinkers as well. So the Buddhists didn't like him either. So it's just in case we
confuse him with the Buddhist.
with the Buddhists, yeah. So. So I'm gonna quote again from Peter Adamson. It's a real short quote, but it's a fun little quote. It's like, though the Buddhists are frequently going to adopt the skeptic's role in coming centuries, the Buddhist canon also contains passages condemning skeptical thinkers. The Buddhist Nikaya mentions such a skeptic named Sanjaya Belatthaputta, I think, and has this to say about them. Sanjaya Belatthaputta said, "If you ask me, is there another world? If I thought so, I would say so, but I don't think so. I don't say it is so, and I don't say otherwise. I don't say it is not, and I don't say it is. I don't say it is not, and I don't say it is not. If you ask, isn't there another world? Both, neither. Is there a fruit and result of good or bad deeds? Isn't there? Both, neither. Does the Tathagata exist after death? Does he not? Both, neither. I don't not say it is not." Thus Lord Sanjaya Belatthaputta, on being asked about the fruits of the homeless life, replied by evasion, just as if on being asked about a mango he were to describe a breadfruit tree. And I thought, of all these ascetics and Brahmins, Sanjaya Belatthaputta is the most stupid and confused. So I neither applauded nor rejected his words, but got up and left.
His speech just rolls right out of the tongue, right?
It's really difficult to read, actually. Yeah, but yeah, the Buddhist Nikaya also did not like him. Yeah, and I think that's in the Buddhist canon. So that's not even later commentaries or later debates or whatever. That's right in the edition in the first canon, and then. Can you maybe just go back to the slide with the 16 topics? Because sure. I just on Jati. You say types of lousy arguments. I know the Hetva Basa gets translated by other people also as fallacy, so that's like lousy argument makes sense. And Chala gets translated as quibbling or wrangling. But Jati gets translated by some as just refutation, and by others as sophisticated refutation. So I'm not 100% sure how, if that's necessarily, I mean, just the translation. I don't have any clarifications on what they mean in the sources I'm looking at. But just calling something refutation or sophisticated refutation doesn't necessarily sound like a lousy refutation. So I don't know if you have a source that clarifies the kinds of refutations and why they would be lousy. Would it be the skeptical
Sure.
kinds of refutations? Or
So hold on. I'm consulting here my Introduction to Indian Philosophy book. So, Jati. So the paragraph on the word jati goes like this. The word jati is here used in a technical sense to mean an unfair reply based on a false analogy. It consists in basing a futile argument on any kind of similarity or dissimilarity between two things to controvert another sound argument. Thus, if one argues, sound is non-eternal because it is an effect of the pot, and another objects that sound must be eternal because it is incorporeal like the sky, then the objection is a kind of jati or futile argument, for there is no necessary explanation of universal relation between the incorporeal and the eternal. So it's kind of like they are using perhaps um, bewilderment by using these lofty concepts like the sky uh, that might bewilder people that are not so trained in these kinds of debates and might fool some people. But I think that properly trained people in debates, I think they will kind of find these. But it depends on the level of deception involved here as well, because they might make some quite believable false analogies that might pass even some of the most attentive, vigilant debaters.
all right, thanks for that. I'll tag up to Graham.
I was going to say the biggest thing that jumped out to me is that the system's built almost algorithmically. Like Francois pointed out, the first basically like 8 points builds the basis for the system, and then they have like the various different types of arguing and arguing against, and then they have the again, strikes me as the end, number 16 is like the stop condition in like the church Turing thesis. Here's how it ends, and here's all your potential outcomes, and you know which of those outcomes happened based off of the previous 15 steps. And it just seems to come across very, crunching algorithmically. And again, even more reinforcement that that whole liberation thing is sort of a second thought that's kind of off in the cloakroom. Tag.
Yeah, well, the examples given aren't really kind of historical examples that might have been famous debates that Nyayikas might have debated others, which is kind of like a downer for me. I would have hoped to know where they would apply this massive computational system that they have here. So it's a massive computational system, and it uses old-fashioned computers, human beings, basically, which up to the middle of the 20th century, computers were human beings. Before they started, IBM started to output mainframes. The computers working at NASA, for instance, were mostly women, actually. So computer before was a job description, actually. And well, I can see people being well trained in this or in Aristotle's organon and winning debates and finding fallacies like a champion, basically. If they really pick up this training properly, then a person like this can be a force to reckon with.
Yeah, seems useful. Um, I don't know.
At
I
least
think
I found useful this distinction between honest and dishonest debates, like on Twitter. I can figure out quite early in the debate if the debate is actually an honest one and we both gain, we both win. Even I learn stuff and whatnot, and the other party hopefully as well. And we're kind of okay with the freedom of expression thing, even if people don't agree with me. I kind of keep reminding myself that people in the past have died for there to be some form of freedom of expression nowadays in some countries. And well, I don't know if I would be courageous enough to die for a person to be able to express their contempt or their disagreement, even polemical insults toward me. But I hope I could, because it's quite ethically noble. But I try to remind myself of these concepts anyway. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry for interjecting.
no worries. It's a good point about freedom of expression and the sort of right to disagree. I was gonna say like that this like of all the darshanas we've gone through, seems the most philosophical and like the most practical, useful in at least coming to true knowledge about things. I guess yoga can be practical for having a healthy body, and yeah, the old school medicine would also probably be practical in some things. I'd be quite curious to know if the system has been elaborated in a form that would make it as like a suitable thing to teach a course on critical thinking. Because I have a couple of textbooks on argumentation and critical thinking that sort of run you through very commonly used fallacies and tactics to debate dishonestly, and then strategies for debating honestly, and also like logic and informal logic and that kind of thing. So from what I've seen, the modern textbooks I seem a bit more useful to me than this, but this gets quite close. And so I wonder if there are like modern versions of this system, or you did say there's been at least over about roughly about 1,000 years since the first sutras were written. There was some commentaries and some build up to around the first millennium CE, if I remember correctly, around 1000 AD.
Yeah, I can recall that slide again.
Timeline, yeah. But it would be cool to see like a update, even though I think it might be difficult to keep it straight with all the terms.
Yeah. So it spanned the entire first millennium, and the data that I got from this textbook on intro to Indian philosophy stopped at the turn of the second millennium, basically the eve of the second millennium.
Yeah. So like it would be interesting to know like how that may have developed further, and what a contemporary traditional introduction to Indian, I guess, informal logic and rhetoric would be.
Yeah.
So critical thinking, argumentation.
Also, not forgetting epistemology.
And epistemology. That's actually nice that they kind of include epistemology. Because in Western books, you'd usually have a separate textbook on epistemology, and then a textbook on argument and informal logic, and then also a separate textbook on research methods. Those would be separate courses. Actually, you could take several courses on research methods, separate courses on quantitative methods and experimental methods and qualitative methods and those kinds of things.
But I've seen people debating, knowing the fallacies almost by rote memorization, and they, instead of winning the debates, they kind of become annoying because every single thing that the other person is saying, it just triggers this is the something fallacy, that's the something fallacy. So it just kind of they just stop debating and start only to engage in taxonomy of fallacies. While to debate, you also need to have a kind of how should I say, an emotional awareness of where you are and where the other party is, and to, if possible, build rapport, which might help with some situations in which some of the dishonest debating is coming from people identifying too closely with their axioms. If people are kind of, their ego and their axioms are all like an amalgamation, and they enter the debate with this kind of defense mechanism of, well, they're going to put my axioms to the test, and so I'll be really hostile and aggressive and try to win them before even any shots are fired on their side or something like that. Then you can kind of tell that probably they are misidentifying themselves with their axioms, with their mental modifications, as coming from yoga as well. And this might come in handy as well, not just the fallacies and whatnot. I think that they are useful, but maybe they are useful for you to realize to identify them without you explicitly expressing that you have identified them, but for you to kind of know where the debate is going. If the debate is staying on dishonesty land, or if it's improving or something like that.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say I definitely agree. I think one of the reasons that the Indians were able to combine all of that into one topic, as opposed to four these days, has to do with, authors' royalties and publisher profits. There's a lot more to be made when you have to buy four textbooks as opposed to one. And one area that I think would be interesting is to stack this up against semiotics, because both of them have a very content-free approach of analysis and construction of things. Like Rogério was just talking to about how they look at the structure of the argument and dismiss it without ever actually listening to a single fact the person had to say. Going to tag out on that.
Yeah, semiotics is something I don't know much about. Something I don't have much background in. But yeah, I actually think it would be nice to have one textbook that kind of covers maybe some of the philosophy of some of the basic, like really foundational stuff in epistemology, and then also how that developed into philosophy of science, and then also cover some of the informal logic and argumentation and rhetoric stuff that usually gets taught in philosophy schools, and then pad that out with some of the more practical research methods that gets taught in engineering and science schools, so that you have kind of like a complete package for if you want to equip yourself with knowledge, this is kind of the way to do it. And maybe even pad it out with how to research things for yourself online. There's a science news journalist on YouTube, Sabine, I can't remember her surname. I think it starts with Hoffen, and I don't know how it ends.
Hofsten Heather or something like that. I think it's a German surname. Something.
Yeah, it's a German surname, and she was originally trained as a physicist, but these days she does science news mostly. She did recently a nice video on how to do your own research, and she starts with like the memes about they did their own research and they're dead. Look, here's their gravestone. They did their own research. And she's kind of pointing out that you could do your own research, and there are like ways to do it that are smarter and better, as long as you're properly humble. Like you won't, over a weekend or a week that you might practically do some of your own research, become an expert that has spent like 10 years really delving deep into a topic. So you won't become an expert, but you can sort of get a rough idea of, especially by looking at review papers and finding those review papers. And sometimes in order to understand the review papers, you'd need some textbooks or some handbooks to explain some of the basics to you. But yeah, if some of that could be included as well in that kind of course, so you have like the more informal internet research methods, and then also the more formal scientific research methods of various kinds, of the quantitative kinds and mathematical kinds and experimental kinds and statistical kinds. Also included in the general philosophy of science, and also the philosophy of knowledge, its epistemology, and also situated in theory of debate and informal logic. That's a bit much for a course. I think I can understand. Probably a course like that would take more than a semester or a year. So I think it's not just publisher royalties, although there are some textbooks that have several years of coursework in one textbook. Like there are physics textbooks that have like a full 2 years worth of curriculum in one textbook. And some mathematics textbooks also have several semesters of content in it. So you do a couple of chapters a semester and then a couple of chapters next semester. So I think you could do it. You could do epistemology and informal logic and rhetoric and philosophy of science and research methodology all in one book. It'd be a cool book to have. And then also it'd be nice to see an Indian version of that book. I'm kind of thinking of a Western version.
I'm actually also thinking about what could be the equivalent of the syncretization between East and West with the lessons of worth that are worthy of including in a concise as concise as possible textbook that basically is geared to making people better at sifting through truth and rejecting stuff that doesn't matter, and also both online and in their science or engineering practices, and also debating peers. So basically creating the contemporary thinker de facto. So it's even more than just the intellect that is being worked here, because with the debate kind of things, you also need to work your, in a sense, charisma a bit. It's a bit like it seems like almost you were describing the evolution of the organon. Then you have the organon by Aristotle. Then you have the novum organon by Bacon. and now we have probably an evolution from what we are learning here since the turn of the second century, the second millennium. Probably people have wrote foundational and groundbreaking texts that we are completely oblivious about, based on the Nyaya tradition, and probably it built upon these lessons. This intro to Indian philosophy just glanced at the modern form of Nyaya, but didn't cite books after the beginning of the second millennium. So I'm kind of in the dark. I think we're all in the dark in relation to that. But it might be possible that there's also something modern based on the Nyaya tradition that could be incorporated in a kind of a second Renaissance novum organon that includes both West and East logic, epistemology, and rhetoric.
Yeah, so just for comparison, I had a look, as I just figured there was more stuff to be learned about yoga. I think Peter Adamson's introduction is very cursory and an overview,
Yeah.
not exactly detailed. I'm with you there. But yeah, I got a book that's as long as the entire book on the history of classical philosophy, that looks just at the history of yoga and different sub-traditions in yoga and how that evolved to the modern state of yoga. And like there are various different kinds of yoga these days as well. So just tracing the history of different yoga traditions. Yeah, there's a lot more to it than just a little bit we covered. And I'm pretty sure someone could write a similar history about the history of Nyaya school, and I might actually look up if any such histories are written. I'm not aware of any such histories, but I suppose very well what might exist, probably exist. Well, the history to write such a book might exist. I don't know if such books have been written, but definitely for yoga, just you could find good histories of yoga, like fat 500-page books, just on the history of yoga. I think for most of the 6 schools we're covering, you could do like a whole fat like 500-page book just on the history of that school. That would have taken a lot longer, and we already have several years left of doing this discussion group as it is. So I'm not complaining. There's a place for just getting dipping your toes in something and being aware that there's like a world of things you don't know about. I think there's some value in that.
It's the combinatorial explosion that someone mentions often.
Yeah, once we get wrapped around it, we really feel like it, we can come back and stretch ourselves by taking on some more yoga. Tag.
Yeah.
Nice pun there, Graham. Thanks for the dad puns. We'll stretch ourselves and do some more yoga.
But we are also gaining quite a bit here, because we are gaining knowledge of stuff that exists that we had no idea existed. For one, even if we don't apply it in our daily lives, we know that it is there, and we have much more opportunities and options open to us because of our unlocked knowledge that there is such a thing as Nyaya, and it towers above logically above the rest of Indian philosophy, and probably we can learn some valuable lessons involving logic, epistemology, and rhetoric from these guys. So yeah, I'm all open to that, and probably somewhere in the future, after a few years, I'll look into the most interesting schools of philosophy that we will learn about. It's likely, yeah.
Something I really like about Nyaya is they take like sort of a similar approach to what some of the other schools take to achieving nirvana or moksha or liberation or salvation or whatever, to thinking. And they reckon like thinking is a skill you can get good at, and if you get good at this skill, you can get good at knowing things, like legitimately actually knowing things. And that's important because you need to know things in order to achieve goals, like to do practical things. So it's not just this otherworldly thing that has nothing to do with practical life. It ties back to practical life, and like they said, even to achieve spiritual liberation, you also need to know what you're doing. Like you can't just, you're unlikely to accidentally stumble upon it. Although that's a possibility that they didn't consider. Some people sometimes accidentally trip over themselves, and there's a expression in my native tongue that translates to "they fall with their ass in butter," which means you accidentally had very good luck and it went very well for you, even though not much skill was involved or no skill was involved. But yeah, I really like this notion that thinking is a skill that can be developed and people can get better at thinking. And that's quite important because I think a lot of people get the message that IQ is very difficult to increase by any exercises. And I think a lot of people take away from that the idea that, oh, well, you're just as smart as you were born and there's not much you can do about it. But there's the thing that is measured by IQ is not the same as skill at thinking. And skill at thinking in many contexts is much more important than IQ. Like if you could trade like even a standard deviation IQ down and get a standard deviation up in thinking skills, probably like you'll be better off trading away some IQ and trading up in some thinking skills. So it's a skill that can be developed and very much worth being developed. Like it helps people live better lives and have better conversations and have better relationships and do all kinds of things better. So yeah, like one of the darsanas that really focused apparently on cultivating the skill to think well and to know well, because for them knowledge is a verb, it's a thing you do to get good at knowing. Yeah, I like that.
This paralleled the new Confucians. One of them was called Wang Yangmin, and he would say knowledge and action are one and the same. If you cannot do anything, you don't have knowledge de facto. And if you claim that you have knowledge but don't act on it, it's the same thing as you don't have any knowledge. So he was a guy for really putting in practice teachings, and only then would he admit that there is knowledge involved. So maybe it was a call for people to engage more with the world instead of just being with the book learning kind of thing, which Nyaya has a really interesting mix here. It's not just, people getting very nerdy about epistemology and logic. They are also proficient debaters, so they get out there, they get shots fired at them in terms of rhetoric, and they fire shots back at them. So this is not to create people who are just book learners. They go out there and put their thinking skills to the test with other complex human beings that arguably also have some logical learnings. Supposedly, the Buddhists also had some logical tradition as well, which might also have yielded some rhetorical proficiency. So these guys Nyayas were really toughening up for a reason, because they had some adversaries to toughen up to.
Yeah. It makes me very happy that they argue so vehemently against the Buddhists, but you got to give the Buddhists some credit in being a productive partner in that whole exchange as well.
Yeah.
I was going to say, as we read, they sum up the arguments against the Buddhists is, the Buddhists are wrong. Let's move on. One of the, the aspects that when I look around is, while I fully agree, thinking is a useful skill and is a skill that you can improve and learn to think better. There are a lot of people out there. I'd be happy if they just actually thought at all once in a while. We can work on improvement later. Let's get a little bit of thinking in every so often under our belt first. Tagging on that.
Yeah. Some people are outsourcing their thinking to certain dogmatic doctrines that might be related to religions or not, sects, political organizations, etc. And if someone challenges them to do some decision, some people just think, what is the doctrine saying me to do, and they do that. I've seen people behaving like that, and that's very, very, very unfortunate. Or some people just merely thinking, what would this big shot that I'm looking up to as a role model, what would he do because he's in front of my organization or something like that, and they just try to apply the other person's thinking. So yeah, that's really unfortunate. And also people, when they receive kind of testimony from their own sanctioned or vouchsafed source organization, they accept it, whatever lousy arguments it might have, while they critically reject everything from outside. So yeah, it might be some non-thinking involved, but it might also be they are just running code as if it were, without even questioning what they're doing.
Do we have some more slides to get through?
Yeah, so showing a bit of their pramanas, their epistemology, and also the logical syllogisms kind of thing. So a bit a short intro to both. So as for the pramanas, this is one of the most important aspects of the Nyaya. So they have pratyaks, perception, anumana, inference, apumana, comparison, and sabda, testimony. Again, pramanas are considered the source of true knowledge. So although these pramanas were central to them, they simply assumed that the pramanas must be reliable. They have this theory of default trust in their cognitions, similar to the Mimamsa innocent until proven guilty epistemology. Then one of the like the third commenter, the third person in the chronology, Udyatokara, said false cognitions are imitations of correct cognitions. Therefore, you must provide some example of correct cognition. So since false cognitions is a thing, this of course logically makes true cognitions also a thing that exists, and there can be comparisons drawn between both, and they can be distinguished somehow. In other words, false cognitions, such as those of perceptual illusions or dreams, they can be called false in contrast to other true cognitions. Then there's also some classification of knowledge. So the two major types of knowledge, anubhava, which is present cognition, and smriti, which is memory or representative cognition. And both of the above can be valid or non-valid. So they use these terms yathartha, valid, ayathartha, non-valid. And prama is valid presentative knowledge, while apramana is non-valid presentative knowledge. So we're classifying, subdividing the first type of knowledge as valid and non-valid. Also, the knowledge or cognition, another terms for cognition is jnana or buddhi, as the mental manifestation of objects. Also, there is this classification as well. So prama is a definite or certain faithful or unerring and non-reproductive experience of the object. So of course, as it is a non-reproductive, it cannot be something memorized or something written. It is actually a direct experience that is ongoing. So maybe this hints at what I was mentioning just a while ago, that we cannot only just assume that there is either the person is completely knowledgeable or completely ignorant. There's also this prama, which is a working kind of memory kind of thing that is ongoing, and probably heuristics might operate here. Memory is not a prama, as it represents the mere reproduction of past knowledge. And of course, memories might also be valid or non-valid. Then there's this concept of starting from doubt. You also went over this, Nerdalliun, so I won't repeat. But I can give a few examples, so there might be two contradictory statements that are made concerning an object, and we might be unsure which statement is true, which casts doubt, causes doubt, or the example of the figure in the distance that we don't know if it is a wooden post or a man. And so all these ingredients here are are interlinked, and they act in a structured manner, not just haphazardly. They are put into practice in an organized manner to help a person reduce their ignorance, or reduce their incorrect knowledge of something, basically, or actually acquire knowledge of something that was not in existence. There's this concept of the five-limbed argument. We will see it in action. But before, there's this example that, well, we see smoke coming out of a hill. Does the smoke equate to a fire? So this is to give an example of for the structure of a good argument. We can claim that nirnaya, legitimate knowledge, that an object has a first property because it has some second property that is always found together with the first property. So basically saying that the second property pervades the first. Some might even use the term implies. The second property implies the first. So we might see, this is my town, so the hill of the town normal, and then in another day I witnessed this and actually snapped the picture as well. So what appears as smoke, and thus it prompts everyone seeing this to assume that at either on the proper hill or behind the hill there is an ongoing fire. And so there's this idea that the two properties, fire and smoke, must have the right relation for an inference to be valid. So smoke is witnessed, is experienced, and thus fire can be inferred. Well, I would be very pedantic about this and say that smoke can arise in different ways other than fire. Like, does smoke really equate to fire? Yeah, smoke can come most of the times from an active fire, but what looks like smoke can come from dry ice, solid CO2, or a reaction between, for instance, ammonia and hydrochloric acid, or an electrical resistance buildup that doesn't necessarily create a fire, but scorches things without a visible flame. Well, when we see the fire, the smoke, actually, when we see the smoke, we can see the water vapor, the white part of the smoke as water vapor separating from the ash that is dark. And thus, it's quite sure, if we kind of give it more properties, or describe it in more detail, we can increase our confidence, even though we will never be owners of the absolute truth in all regards. So to give you the example of this fire example with the Gautama's five-limbed argument, so it starts by: state the thesis to be proved. There is fire on the mountain. Cite the reason. It's because I see smoke up there. Invoke the universal rule and give an example to illustrate. Where there is smoke, there is fire. Just like at home, in the kitchen. Apply the universal rule. There is smoke on the mountain, and draw the conclusion, so there must be fire there. So it seems like we are repeating ourselves here by what we said in the beginning, but this would be employed in a debate. So people often forget what was said previously, or something like that. So they repeat, so everyone is on the same page. Also, there might be these 16 ingredients at play here. Like in the beginning, it might be a hypothetical argument, or tarka, and also samsaya, or doubt, uncertainty. And then, of course, when we cite the reason, there might be prayojana, a goal or purpose, and also pramana, because since we see the smoke, we're using one of the pramanas, actually. And of course, then we're using others like Siddhanta, background principles, to provide foundation for debate. And when we end in 5, we claim legitimate knowledge. So we claim that we use the pramanas correctly. We experienced the smoke, we connected the smoke correctly with and compared with other situations in which there was connection. Then we established the inference, and then we draw this conclusion that this is nirnaya, legitimate knowledge. The only pramana that isn't involved here, actually, I would argue, is testimony. If the actual person is the same person that is running this over. But if the person is debating, then this person is also providing testimony. And they might be considered a reliable source of testimony if also they are employing this system correctly, if they aren't using any fallacies or any underhanded techniques. Then there's the other example with sound. So sound is not eternal because it is produced. Everything that is produced is also eventually destroyed. As for instance, a jar. Since sound is produced, it too must eventually dissipate or be destroyed. Therefore, sound is non-eternal. And then here is a comparison between Aristotle's syllogism structure from the prior analytics from 350 BC. So 2 premises and the conclusion. Every tree is a plant. Every plant is alive. Therefore, every tree is alive. While the Nyaya, of course, they have more nuts and bolts to their system. So this is to prove every tree is alive. Reason, because they are plants. Universal rule and example. Every plant is alive. All trees I have seen are plants, thus far, like that apple tree. Universal rule. Since every tree is a plant, every tree is alive. So yeah, this was my attempt to transpose the example from Aristotle to Nyaya, because I couldn't find, not in a chance, that both would use the same example. And yeah, this is Nyaya intro for you guys. This is by no means a complete rundown on Nyaya. Neither we can claim we have been detailed here. We've only been as detailed as time permits and also the sources that we have permitted. But we hope that we've shed some light on Nyaya for ourselves and for others watching. Yeah, feel free, guys, to comment on this part as well.
I don't have too many comments. I kind of like the symmetrical structure of the arguments, where you a little bit of repetition, but in reversed order. It's like there's a reflection around the universal rule in the point 3 of the Gautama's 5-limbed argument. But then the nice thing about Aristotle's syllogisms is they could take like many variations. So the universal all A's are B's, B is a C, therefore all B's are C, therefore all A's are C's, that kind of thing. It's just one of the syllogisms you can get out of Aristotle's form. You can get many other kinds of syllogisms too. And maybe it's possible to get other kinds of arguments from the 5-limbed argument as well.
But you need to work harder, because you need to provide examples. I think that's where you need to collect some data.
Yeah, I've seen examples of Aristotle, and he even like tabulated them. I can't remember how many there are, but there are like very many forms. So maybe those forms can be transported into this 5-limbed argument, because maybe what you could do with Aristotle's thing is just copy the reflecting the argument around the the second premise, I guess. So you start with the conclusion, or and then end with the conclusion again. So you might do something like that. So it may just be a cosmetic difference at the end of the day. But yeah, I'm also not sure whether the Gautama or in the Bhāsya they elaborated the different kinds of syllogisms, or if they just did a couple of ad hoc arguments, or maybe that all use the same kind of thing. I guess I would have had to take a look at the source material to know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something that came up. But other than that, not too many comments. I'm getting a little tired, so it's a little difficult to think hard and come up with examples now. So tag out. Graham, any comments?
Yeah, one thing that jumps out at me here is the difference between the East and the West. Is like Aristotle is taking building blocks and he's building, structures from there. And it's more like with Nyaya, you're doing an unpacking, unraveling. And it's like you're starting with the idea of it's alive, and then you're like diving into it to unravel it as to why it's alive and all that one, and then only to circle back to it's alive again. And Aristotle is much more of like, here's a block, I'm sticking a block on it, and it's just, like I said, two different approaches. Neither of them are really right or wrong, but that was the big difference that I was noticing right now. Tag.
I also have a nice picture here of who could be. It could be Gautama or one of the commenters wearing these typical orange saffron tunics or robes, contemplating the universe.
Looking all badass while he's doing it. It's a nice, nice picture.
Yeah. It's the artists of the Second Renaissance at work.
Yeah, I didn't realize saffron got colors quite that orange out of it. I'm used to much more of that bright yellow from saffron. But no, nice picture. And I love the beard. You got to love that beard.
Yes.
Anyway, thanks. That was really interesting and really fun, as always. I'm looking forward to diving into some more detail about the Nyaya school's views on perception and, I guess, mind. There's another one too.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting now. Well, we'll unpack some more of Nyaya in coming discussions. So yeah, it's a good thing too, because they're interesting. So it'll be fun to see what they had to say about perception and all that. So thank you to you two. Thanks for your slides, as always, also, Rogério. And thanks to the audience.
Thanks.
We'll see you next time.
See you guys.
See you next time. Bye-bye.